Yes, Assalamualaikum, and welcome back to ESC 4603. This is for week 7, energy systems and the environment, and we are going to look at renewable energy resources and its associated technologies. So without further ado, let's have a look at the learning outcomes. So for this topic, actually, you guys will need to know or you need to identify the types of renewable energy resources, technologies, and its applications. So if you guys still remember, in the previous 2 videos, we've looked at a number of different conventional energy resources. We look at how coal, petroleum, natural gas is formed, and how it is formed underneath the earth. And we look at how these different resources are used to be transformed into energy that humans can use. Okay, and of course, one of the things that is the similarity of the ones that we learned before is those are non-renewable. So it means that one day it's going to be finished off. Yeah, it may be soon, it may be a long time coming, okay, but because the resource is finite, okay, it has to be used up at one point, which is why people are also looking at renewable resources. Now, there's so many different resources out there. If you guys remember about natural resources, when we talk about it a few lectures back, yeah, look around you. There's so many things. Okay. But basically, the easiest would be solar. You wake up every morning, you see the sun, you see the light. Okay, that is energy actually. It's an energy resource. There's something that can be done from that. The water around you, and next to our department, there's actually a lake. That is a body of water. Maybe something that can be done with that actually, yeah. And we look at things like hydroelectric power, so on and so forth. Of course, apart from that, we see things like wind, geothermal, biofuel, yeah. And these are all very interesting resources of energy because apart from them being renewable, it also fulfills certain conditions, yeah, that make it more desirable compared to things like fossil fuels. Okay, so we start off, so this follows the similar themes from last week. We look into each of these resources and how basically it is used as power and what it can be applied with. Okay, so we start off with solar. Solar is actually, it's defined as energy from the sun. So around, if you think about it, these are 1.74 times 10 to the power 17 watts per hour of solar power hits the earth. So you can imagine like there's a lot of potential there. It hits the earth like per hour. So imagine if you can make full use of that energy to power the earth. So there are actually 2 types of solar energy. First is thermal energy, okay, and the other one is electric energy. So it's although we say solar again, solar is the resource. It's where the energy comes from. It comes from the solar, but in what form it is used to be converted into energy, it is actually 2. It's not only, when we talk about solar, it's just the solar cells. It's not. There's actually another one. We call it concentrated solar power, CSP. Okay, and this is actually a thermal energy. So refresh back, what is the difference between thermal energy and electric energy? Okay, of course, if you think about it, solar cell, the one where you the cell is being put on rooftops, for example, or in a very large areas where they put up the solar cells. That is photovoltaics. It's used to convert the solar energy into electric. Otherwise, when it is thermal energy, it's actually using that solar energy to be converted into heat. Yeah, we'll see about how these two are different later on. Okay, so here it is actually. So not too long. So next slide, solar power. So this is photovoltaics versus CSP that I mentioned before. So photovoltaics here is it's a no-brainer lah. I think you all know what happens. You may not know the mechanism of how it works, but basically you have an idea already. You have this solar cell, yeah. So the actual term of it would be the photovoltaics, or you call it PV. Yeah? PV is photovoltaics. You set it up, and then the sunlight hit it, and the reactions happening inside the solar cell, okay, will convert the solar power just now from the sun into electricity. Okay, whereas for concentrated solar power, it's basically almost similar. Yeah? However, it uses this kind of mechanism. So imagine you have a large area and you have a lot of mirrors. Yeah? And this mirror, it is structured, or it is located in such a way that when the sun hits the mirror, okay, it will reflect that light to one concentrated towel. Okay, so imagine this is here, right? So if there's some there, some here, some here. So when the sun hit it, okay, the angle is constructed in such a way that it will be reflected to that towel. Okay, so you can imagine, right? So even if you have a mirror, you hold it yourself, you can actually rearrange it. Yeah? You can angle it to make sure that the light goes a certain way. So this is how it works. Yeah? So what happens is that just by doing that, okay, imagine it's very, very, very hot, okay, and this tower actually, it concentrates this heat, okay, and imagine there's also a turbine here, okay. So basically there are a number of ways lah. I think we'll see about it in the next few slides, but you just imagine that is usually they use a salt solution. Okay? They heat it up, it turns into steam, okay? And that steam will turn the turbine. Remember, turbine is the thing that is rotating, and as it rotates, it will generate electricity. So that is how it works, CSP. Okay? So both here, it uses solar, right? It uses solar energy, but it is being applied in different ways. All right. So the key mechanism, basically, if we think about PV, because I think a lot of people are very interested in PV. Okay. I think even new houses, sometimes in specific areas, they even offer you, if you want to set up a PV system, okay, at your house, okay, because then you would be able to reduce your electricity consumption. And by default, you are going to reduce your energy bills. And so you don't have to pay too much to TNB because you are generating your own electricity. And the similar concept is happening in the industry. Okay, so if you think about it, if you open paper, okay, nowadays, I think the habit of reading newspapers are, almost gone, I would say. But people don't buy newspaper anymore. But it's very, very different back then. Now we always browse through newspaper, right? And the news. If you look at the global and even the national news nowadays, one of the things that people are very concerned about is sustainability. They are very concerned about climate change. They're concerned about carbon emissions, carbon footprint. So you guys are, at a very potential stage actually. You are environmental science students. You should be able to relate what you learn with what's happening outside. You are actually at the very, very advantageous position. Okay, why I'm saying that? Because when you go out later on, when you start working, you are actually the key people who are going to bring the knowledge about all of these things: sustainability, carbon footprint. How are you going to advise your company, how you are going to reduce the carbon footprint of that company's operation, for example. And a lot of it is related to energy, because energy use is one of the highest producer of carbon, which is why we see now people are, really, really going big into solar. If you heard about UPM had just signed an MOU with TNB, okay, and we will basically have a PV field in UPM, okay, and that will help reduce our electricity consumption. So we see this in the universities, we see this in homes, and the same thing at big industries, small industries even. People are really, really going into this. So what is actually happening in PV? Solar photovoltaic. So please bear with me because this may be a bit technical, but I will try to make it as general as possible. So usually, if you look at solar cells, it is produced from silicon crystals, basically. However, if it's in pure form, only silicon, it doesn't have free electrons. Okay, why is electrons important? So remember, guys, I think you also know this. You also learned this even in middle school or even sekolah rendah when I think you have learned this. What is electricity? Electricity is the stream of moving electron. So to have something moving, you must have something that can move. Okay, if it's pure form, silicon, and it doesn't have free electrons, how are you going to make sure that you can produce electricity? Because it doesn't have any free electrons. Okay, and because of that, usually there are two types silicon crystal that is being used in solar PV. So one is doped with phosphorus. Okay, you can see it here actually, N-type and P-type. So N-type, N denotes it to be negative. Okay, and this type of silicon is doped with phosphorus. Okay, whereas P-type, which is positive type, it is obtained when boron is doped into the silicon. Okay, so this is boron and this is phosphorus. So why is it negative? It's negative charge because just remember this. If something is negative, meaning it has an excess of electron. Okay, anything that is negative, even if you have a battery, you have the anode and cathode. And what is the difference is that each end has different ions. Okay, it has a higher concentration of electron at the cathode, right? So going back to this N-type, it's negatively charged, meaning that it has an extra electron. Okay, and where does that extra electron comes from? Okay, so when solar power, when sunlight hit, imagine this is a sheet of silicon crystal, because we can always imagine that as a solar PV cell. Okay, imagine that it's a sheet. So as the sunlight hits that, okay, I should have drawn that easier to understand. Okay, as sunlight hits that sheet of N-type silicon crystal, okay, an electron is discharged. Okay. Sorry about that. The electron charge is discharged, meaning that it has one free electron. Okay, and that is from one arm. Imagine there's a lot here, isn't it? So there's a lot of free electrons that are capable of moving. Okay. In the same situation, okay, when this happened, yeah, with the p-type, okay, this atom, it lacks actually one electron. Okay, and when something is lacking in something, it creates what? It creates a gap, it creates a hole. Okay, so in this case, a p-type will have a lot of holes. Okay, imagine here, there's a lot of free electron. Another one, there's a lot of holes. Okay, so what's going to happen? So we see that here actually. In solar photovoltaics, yeah, these two different semiconductors will be placed next to each other. Okay, and as this is an actual solar PV, okay, as the light hits, just now remember electron is being produced. Okay, there's a lot of electron there. Yeah, and actually there's the p-type just now, there's a lot of holes. Okay, so what's happening is that the electron is going to move. It's going to want to move to the holes. Now that's how it is. You have something that is concentrated with something. It's going to move towards a place where it is less concentrated. And as that happens, you cannot move through this. Okay, so there's going to be a circuit there. So you can see actually from the below figure. Okay, so electron here, the blue thing, it will have to move through this one. Okay, and as it moves, it creates a current. It creates a current. So that current is the one that is generates the electricity. All right, and you know this is moving in one way. Right? It's always moving here, right? So this actually, it is called a direct current. So we're going to learn more about this in the next lecture, actually, the difference between direct current and alternating current, DC and AC. It's not the band, okay? But basically, if you just think about it, electricity in your house, it all uses this one, AC, doesn't use DC. Okay, and this is one of the things that people have to bear in mind when they use solar PV. And solar PV, it generates a direct current, not alternating current, right? So there are implications there, yeah, but don't worry, we'll look at that a little bit more later. Okay, and then just now it's about PV, right? Now we are going to look at thermal solar. Okay, remember just now we're talking about thermal energy, okay, and CSP. So there's actually three types of CSP. It's called throw systems, power tower systems, dish engine systems. There are three types. Yeah, and I'm just gonna go very quickly on this because the theory is almost similar. It's always about reflecting the sunlight to the receiver. Yeah. The only difference is how that process is made. So if it's a throw system, it actually refers to the reflector, the reflectors, how it looks like. So in throw system, it usually uses parabolic throw. Yeah. And it actually, so instead of a tower, okay, that system has a pipeline here. Yeah, and this pipeline is usually filled with oil. Okay, so imagine this is happening. This is a sun, yeah. The sunlight hits the, imagine those are the mirror. Okay, this is the mirror. So as it hits the mirror, it will be reflected onto the pipe here. And that will heat up the pipe and also the oil inside it. Okay, and this hot oil, okay, will be used to boil water actually. So you don't use that to turn the turbine, okay, but you use that oil to boil water, and when water is boiled, it produces steam, and that steam is used to turn the turbine. And as that turns, okay, electricity is being produced. Okay, so you might one question here that you will need to try to answer, okay, in the in your attendance form later on. Okay, why do throw system uses oil instead of water? Just have a think about it, okay? And I will share a hint. Yeah, if you still remember, I think in the second lecture about the heat capacity of different things, yeah, that might give you an idea of the answer, right? So this is about throw system, and this is the question that you guys will need to answer in the attendance, right? The second system is power tower system. Okay, this is what I've talked about before about the tower. Yeah, always similar. It uses heliostat. Okay, so these things are called heliostat. This is an actual picture of what's happening lah. And it is positioned is such an angle that the sunlight will be reflected to the receiver, and the receiver is in the form of a tower. Okay, and the same thing happens. Okay, this is the sunlight will hit the fluid. Okay, whatever fluid that is being used. So here it usually uses molten salt. Okay, and this salt will be used to heat up water. Water turns to steam. Steam turns to turbine. Turbine generates electricity. Similar thing. Yeah. And lastly, the dish engine system. Okay, so dish engine system here is actually it's usually for smaller amounts of energy lah, because you will have just one parabolic dish. Okay, and what happens is that this dish, okay, it will turn, it will keep track of the sun. You know, the sun, as the earth rotates, okay, the position of the sun will be different in the morning and the afternoon. Okay, in the late afternoon will be different, right? So this type of systems, the dish of mirror will track the movement of the sun. Okay, it will move and try to capture as much of sunlight as possible. Okay, and the same thing, it reflects that sunlight to the receiver. Okay, so the only difference here is that the receiver, it doesn't use turbine. as compared to the previous two systems. Okay, this system actually uses an external combustion engine. Yeah, external combustion engine. Okay, it's actually, this is the thing that is in your car, combustion engine. If you have ever, if you're ever interested to look at engines, in cars, this is what is happening in the piston. So here, in the tubes, okay, it is filled with a gas. Okay, so usually it's either hydrogen or helium. Okay, and as it receives the heat from the sun just now, okay, imagine you have a very you have a closed system, okay, and you have the gas inside, and you heat it up. What's going to happen? It is going to expand. Yeah? So this expansion, okay, will move the piston. So this is actually what is happening. It will move the piston, and with that work, it loses the energy, and it will go back to its original position. And then you receive more heat. It's going to happen again. It expanded, move the piston, lose the energy, and then return back. So that's happening in a very, very fast, iterations. It's happening like in 1 minute. Maybe it's more than hundreds of thousands. Okay. Now, this movement, of it being moving up and down, okay, it creates mechanical power. Okay, and the same thing, this mechanical power actually drives the generator to produce electricity. So it's now no longer about steam turbine, but it uses the engine. But it is still mechanical energy, and it is finally being converted into electricity. Right? So of course, there are many cases when people talk about solar, there are advantages, there are disadvantages. Some of the advantages that I may want to highlight is, solar energy is distributed over wide geographical area. So especially for us in the, in the tropical belt, right? So we receive a lot of sunlight. And this is different from temperate countries where we may have 4 seasons even. So in winter, they're going to have a bit of a problem. But for us, it's almost available year round. Even if it's raining, there are still some light that you can harvest. So these regions actually have access to electricity generation at a stable cost, for long-term use. It is also environmentally friendly. It is low maintenance. Not saying that it doesn't have to be maintained at all. There are, but it's quite low as compared to different types of energy. Some disadvantages is, of course, the high capital, initial cost, because the material itself is costly. Although now the cost is, being reduced faster and faster because there's a lot of R&Ds involved. So we are able to further reduce the cost. Of course, secondly, it requires a large area for installation to achieve a good level of efficiency. We're not talking about one house use. We are talking about supplying electricity to millions of households. And to be able to achieve that kind of capacity, you're going to need a very large area. Okay, presence of clouds and pollution in the air may also affect energy production, of course, because imagine if the light is not enough, how are you going to generate enough electricity? Okay, and actually efficiency now is only about 15%. So it only converts. So remember just now, the amount of sunlight that hits the earth. So the current system are only able to convert up to 15% only. Yeah, they're not able to convert 100%. Yeah. All right. Now we move on to the second one, which is hydropower. Yeah, hydropower is actually generation of electricity using the flow of water as the energy source. And here I just put in the water cycle, yeah, to relate back to water lah, because usually for hydropower, you know, it will involve dams, yeah? And dams usually, you know, you must it has a certain specific area and geographical location that you have to consider, right? So how actually hydropower is converted to electric power? This relates to potential energy. Yeah, you know, so this is a very basic representation of what is happening. And again, here, if you see turbine, so always you just have to remember if it involves turbine, yeah, that is the thing that will be rotated, and then that mechanical energy will be converted to electrical energy. So what's happening is actually, you know, you have dams, yeah, and usually we want, the general consideration is that the water is moving from a higher elevation to a lower elevation. And as it goes down, that difference in elevation translates into potential energy. That's the amount of energy that can be made use to turn into the electric. Yeah. So what happens here is that when they open the sorry, this one is here. Okay, this is the 4B. So usually when the dam is full, they will open it, and then the flow of water there will actually turn the turbine. Okay, because it wants to go from here to there, and then as it goes down, that movement will turn the turbine. So basically, there are 3 types of categories, yeah, high, medium, and low. And this is actually related to the head. And when we say head, is actually the difference between the elevation. So here is from here to here lah. So the difference that is called the head. So you have high head, which means that the difference is more than 100 meter. You have medium head, 10 to 100 meter, and you have low head, less than 10 meter. Okay, and power is actually proportional to the product of head times flow. And so the flow rate times the the head, okay, or the easiest the easiest word would be the height lah. Okay, the difference in height. Now, if we talk about turbines, just now about hydro turbines, right? There are different types, and it would be good for you if you can just remember there's 2 types: reaction turbines and impulse turbines. Okay. Reaction turbine actually relates to pressure drop, okay, and it is fully immersed in water. Okay. And as the water moves through the turbine, okay, it will be rotated, right? And this is happening in total immersion, as compared to impulse turbine, where actually it has like buckets, you know, and the water will move into the buckets and turn the turbine. Okay, so this is usually it's not fully immersed. There must be some parts that are being exposed. Okay, and that is where the water is hitting the bucket and turn it. Right. So these are the names of examples for reaction turbines and impulse turbines. So for reaction, we have propeller, Francis, and Kaplan, whereas for impulse turbines, we have Pelton, Turgot, and cross flow turbines. Right. Now, of course, hydropower is one of the easiest. It's very reliable, yeah, but it cannot escape from controversy. Why? Because usually it requires a very wide area. That is one thing. Okay? It's very expensive, yeah, and one of the biggest reason is actually the environmental problem, because to create the dam, you would need to restrict the movement of water, basically, because you want the water to be collected in one place. Okay, and in the case of here, Three Gorges Dam in Hubei province, it produces a very large amount of electricity, 22,500 megawatt. And this is actually comparable to 30 conventional power plants. Imagine that. How many power plants do we have in Malaysia? Yeah, not even, I have to check, yeah, but I think it's not even up to 10. Yeah. The actual plant may be more, okay, but the actual, the location itself, not more than 10, right? So look at that. How much is it? However, it changes the total area. Okay, the nature of rivers, previously it was a valley, now it becomes a lake, okay, becomes canyon. So these are the things, what's going to happen to the wildlife, what's going to happen to the people perhaps that are living there, indigenous people. Okay, so these are the questions that people have to answer if they try to consider about hydropower. Okay. Of course, there are its advantages and disadvantages. First and foremost, for its advantage, it is emission-free. And there's no CO2, there's no SOx, NOx, there's no hydrocarbons, no particulates whatsoever. Yeah. And has a very high conversion efficiency, more than 80%, and it is scalable depending on where it is located. It is scalable. You can just, already, if I have certain number of area, you have certain amount of turbine, certain capacity, you're gonna generate this specific amount of electricity. Yeah. It's quite low operating and maintenance costs, and it has a long lifetime. Okay, but the disadvantages are there. Loss of habitat due to land inundation, variable output. Sometimes when there's a lot of rainfall, you can have a lot more electricity. Okay, but if there's no rain at all and the water in the dam is reducing, there may come a time when it's not enough, okay, to turn the turbine and you won't have electricity at all. It has its impacts, environmental impacts, of course, okay, on river flows and aquatic ecology. And of course, social and health impacts, initial capital costs, and long lead time in construction. Now, usually it takes years. It's not something, when you compare solar, for example, you just plug and play. Okay, you can get electricity tomorrow, even if you install it today, but not with hydropower. Now, we're still talking about hydro, okay, but just now it's about dams, right? There's also tidal energy. Yeah, tidal energy, tides lah. Tides are vertical rise and fall of the sea level as a result of gravitational attraction between the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun to a lesser extent. So, you know, the tides, we have high tides, we have low tides. Yeah? So the difference in this is, again, the level of water. Okay, so imagine you have the tidal plant here. Okay, here. So this portion is called the basin. So this is the basin. Okay, so as the tide, as it goes to a high tide, okay, the water is higher, right? And water, the gate is open in the beginning. Okay, so as it goes up, water will also fill up here, will be the same level. Okay, and when that happens, you close the gate. Okay, so this is closed now, no access anymore, but the level is similar. Okay. So when it is low tide, okay, because here is closed, right? Actually, the water in the ocean is at a lower level. Okay, and here you have it at a higher level. You open the gate and the water are going to move into the sea. Okay? And here you put in the, there is actually the turbine here. Okay, and as the water flows, it will turn the turbine, generating electricity. So it comes to a point where the water is used up. Now it's similar level to outside. You close the gate and you close it, and then high tide again, water is higher here. The same thing happens, but on the opposite direction. Okay, so the water, now you open the gate, water goes here, it turns the turbine, generating electricity, and then water will rise until it reaches the same point here, and you close the gate. So this is happening continuously, and you are going to be able to generate electricity also continuously. Right, so just now it's about tide, now it's about waves. Okay, so waves are generated by the wind as it blows across the sea surface, and the energy is transferred from the wind to the waves. Okay, so wave, it can be different depending on the various factors lah. So the stronger the wind blows, okay, the higher, longer, faster, and more powerful the waves are. Okay, and there are actually many types of systems that you can install. Yeah, and but basically there are three conditions, or I would say three categories. First is the shoreline devices, and this is actually the keyword. So it's close to the shoreline. Okay, you have near shore devices, and this is actually from the breaker zone and the waters immediately beyond the breaker zone. Okay, so this is actually around 20-meter water depth. And then you have the offshore devices. So this is the one that is further out to the sea. So I'm not going to go into further detail, yeah, but I'm going to leave you here with the 4 basic wave energy capture type methods: point absorbers, wave attenuators, oscillating water column, and overtopping or spillover devices. So these are some of the technologies used to capture the wave energy, right? We move on to the next one. So this is actually quite interesting. It is called OTEC, OTEC. And what it means is it's ocean thermal energy conversion. Just let that sink for a while. Okay, it's in the ocean. It's a thermal energy, okay, and it is converted into something, right? So basically, this is making use of the difference in temperature of water. Okay, so imagine if you go very, very deep into the sea, right? The temperature is going to be very, very cold. Not it's not going to be hot, it's going to be very, very cold. So you can actually see from this graph here, as you go further down, here, if it's just around, 100 meters, it's going to be around that. Sorry, that's not comparable, but you get the idea. It's around 20 to 24, right? But as you go even down, it's gonna be going to like 4 degrees or even lower. Yeah. So what is happening here is the difference in temperature just now. It's used to operate a heat engine. If you guys still remember the previous 2 lectures about, when we talk about heat engines, and the difference between like refrigerator, your air conditioner, still remember, right? It's the difference in temperature that is the major factor. Yeah. So basically what is happening is you have here the deep water. Okay, deep water is colder. Okay, and you have again the surface water, which is at a higher temperature. All right, and then you have actually this system. Okay, imagine this is like a fridge or like an AC air conditioner. Yeah, you have the vaporizer, you have the condenser. So in that system, it uses ammonia. It uses ammonia, different from your fridge, of course. A fridge uses a different gas, okay, but it's basically gas lah. That's the most important thing. So this gas, let's see, let's start from one side. So here, in vaporizer. So in vaporizer, the ammonia is in there, right? It's in the yellow thing, kind of thing. Okay. And the surface water here is like 15 degrees Celsius. Okay. And it's actually hotter. Okay. Compared to here, the deep ocean water, right? And this will allow the ammonia to be vaporized because it's warmer. Okay, and the ammonia just now, which was in liquid form, it will be vaporized, and then this vapor will turn the turbine, and it generates electricity. Okay, and as that happens, it is flowing into the condenser. Okay, and condenser, we have the cold ocean water just now, and this one is actually used to cool down the ammonia. So try to not to confuse it with water. Although, because even if you see 15 degrees, masih sejuk, still cold, right? But this is, we're talking about ammonia. Okay, and the difference, although it's very, very low, 5 degrees and 15 degrees, but with a very good heat engine, you're going to be able to generate a lot of power, a lot of electricity by this mechanism, just by condensing and vaporizing the ammonia. And how do you do that? It's by using the difference in water temperature. All right, so this system is actually quite efficient, although a larger temperature difference is needed to ensure higher energy conversion efficiency. So if you can get a very low temperature ocean water and quite high surface water temperature, a lot more electricity can be generated because it makes it more efficient. Right, so that's that about OTEC. Okay, we are moving now into wind energy. Okay, wind energy is also another form of renewable energy, and It is actually caused by the uneven heating of the Earth's surface and rotation of the Earth. Okay. So as it heats up, you guys still remember when I talk about the movement of winds from the sea to the land and to the land, from the land to the sea, the difference between night and day. It's related to the temperature of the sea and temperature of the land lah. Okay, whoever is hotter, the wind is going to move from the place where it's hotter to the place where it's colder. Okay, but basically, it also creates a pressure difference. Okay, and the greater the pressure, okay, the harder the wind blows, right? So basically, windmills has been around for a very, very long time. It's been used for over 3,000 years. And it's actually an important part of life for many communities around 1,200 BC. And back then it was used to grind grains and to pump water. Because back then people are heavily dependent on agricultural activities. They are farming, they are planting something. Okay, so they use these windmills to help them do this economic activities. Okay, so basically wind turbines, also similar when we talk about turbines, right? It's rotating. Yeah? But how it rotates is it uses the wind. Yeah? And the windmill design is actually very, very important to wind energy if we are going to use that as a form of renewable energy. Okay. Basically, it's about the size, yeah, and design of the turbine and generator. So you have a different, basically different consideration. If you are going for very large turbines, yeah, actually you are able to deliver electricity at a lower cost. And because if you think about it, the foundation cost, planning cost, everything, it's independent of size. Even if you have very large turbines, compared to very small turbines, the cost, the planning cost, the foundation cost is actually almost similar. Okay. But of course, for large turbines, it's more suited to offshore wind plants. Okay, offshore means it's in the ocean, in the sea, not on, not usually on land. Okay, so in areas where it is difficult to find sites, one large turbine on a tall tower uses the wind extremely efficiently. Whereas for small turbines, okay, it is considered as well because sometimes that area may not be able to handle the large electrical output from a large turbine. Okay, remember just now here, it's very, very effective. Okay, if it produces a lot of electricity, okay, the grid cannot take it. They may be overwhelmed. So you are basically producing electricity that cannot be used. Yeah? So in that situation, small turbines would be the better option. Okay. However, because it also has high cost, because it's small, but remember just now the cost is similar, it may not be economical in some areas. And have to also consider the landscape, because this is also one thing that people keep on saying when they talk about wind, because they say that, oh, when I look at the windmills, thousands of windmills in one large area, they say they don't like it. They don't like the look of it. Yeah, and it changes the landscape. Yeah. Another thing to consider is the number of blades. Yeah, and the most common design is the three-bladed turbine. Okay, because this is actually very stable. Yeah, we don't usually use even numbers. Okay, so not 2, 4, 6. We use odd number 3. because the even numbers will give stability problems for a machine with a stiff structure, right? So this is an example lah. So basically here you can see already, yeah. So this is the generator, yeah, and this is actually the turbine, the rotor, and as it turns, it's going to turn the generator, and this is what is producing the electricity. All right, so in wind turbine generators, yeah, it has two types. You can use small generators or large generators. So for small generators, it actually requires less force to turn compared to larger ones. But of course, that comes at the cost of lower power output, and it is less efficient. And if you consider a large wind turbine, but small generator, it will produce electricity during many hours of the year, but it will capture only a small part of the energy content at high wind speed, because imagine it's turning very quickly. However, the generator cannot efficiently transform that mechanical power into electricity because it's a small generator. Whereas if you have a large generator, it's very efficient at high wind speed. Okay, and why is this significant is that you have to consider there is a limit, there is a lower limit required for wind power to work. If it's too low, yeah, you won't be able to create much electricity because you're not going to be able to turn it, especially if we talk about large generators. Yeah. So and basically it's here lah. This is the one of the reason. If the generator has larger coils and or a stronger internal magnet, it will require more force to start in motion. Now start pun dia dah tersangkut because you don't have enough force, yeah, as compared to small generator. So there are different considerations there that mostly is related to the location. How does the wind speed in that area is? If it's very consistent year-round, very high, then you can go for large generator. But if that location it has variable speed, then small generators would be a better option. Okay. This again is the advantages and disadvantages of wind energy. Okay, advantage of course is the environmental benefit. It's clean, has no emission, you don't need to fuel it up, and actually wind blows day and night compared to sun or solar power, where you cannot generate electricity during nighttime. But for wind, you can basically have wind no matter the time of the day. Okay. But the disadvantages are that it has low power density. It needs a very large number of windmills to produce modest amount of power, sometimes unpredictable. The cost is quite high. The environmental costs relating to, of course, material maintenance costs is high, but also noise, birds, and appearance. People looking at the landscape, for example. And if you think about it, it cannot meet large scale and transportation energy needs. Transportation because we are still in the age of internal combustion engine cars. We are not everyone has electric cars. So we are still dependent on some type of fuel to move the car. Although all of these renewable energies, a lot of them are focusing on electricity, but you have to stop and think as well. How about cars? The cars, it cannot use, even if you produce a high amount of electricity, but the car cannot take it. They cannot use that power. They still need fuel. So that's where we are right now. Yeah. And we're going to look into biofuels later on. But before that, we're going to go very quickly on geothermal energy. Right? So geothermal energy is heat derived within the subsurface of the Earth. It's 2 to 4 miles below the Earth's surface. And actually the rock temperature is well above the boiling point. Yeah. And you know, geothermal reservoir, okay, actually the hot water and steam is trapped in permeable and porous rocks to form a geothermal reservoir. And this reservoir can be discovered by testing the soil or analyzing the underground temperature. And another indication is in the areas where geysers, boiling mud pots, volcanoes, and hot springs are found. So you would know that in those locations, there's actually geothermal reservoir. If you have ever been to hot springs in Malaysia, there are plenty of those places. And you can imagine that underneath it, there is a geothermal reservoir. Okay, and how this energy can be extracted is basically, again, we use heat pumps. Okay? Heat pumps, very similar to just now when we talk about OTEC. Yeah? So that is one way it is being used to generate electricity. And that is actually an indirect use. There's also a direct use of this geothermal energy, and that is the heat itself. And that is, of course, in hot springs and spas, you just use that water, right? The spring water, the hot spring water, sorry. And then for heating purposes, you can use that for a number of different applications, right? And also it can actually be used to provide heat to industrial processes. But the only difference is that this is direct, so you just use the water as it is, okay, to heat up something. And indirect is that you use a heat pump to convert this thermal energy into electricity. Okay, this is an example of a geothermal power plant. Okay, just now when I talk about indirect use of geothermal energy, the representation of that is the geothermal power plant. Sorry about that. Yeah, I want to. All right, now, so this is a reservoir. Okay, and actually, what happens is that you have cold water from the surface, and you pump it. You pump it into the reservoir. Okay, and you know this cold water as it goes into the reservoir is hot, so the cold water just now will be heated. Okay, and as it heats up, it's going to return to the surface because it's under pressure. You know, here it keep on being pumped in to the reservoir. So you're gonna have to, something is going to have to go out. Okay, and that pressure generates the flow of the hot water to the surface. Okay, now that goes into a heat exchanger. Okay, heat exchanger is just that it exchanges heat. Okay, and it exchanges that between two separate flows of fluids. Okay, here is one fluid, here is another. So this hot water goes into the heat exchanger, okay, and it actually meet up with the cool water from this other flow. Okay, imagine it goes here and that goes there. It meets up. One is hot, one is cold, so the heat will go to the cold one. Okay, and as the heat is lost, this one it becomes colder. Okay, it goes back to the pump and being pumped back into the reservoir. Whereas here, the now hot water, okay, will be turned into vapor. Okay, and that rotates, that goes into the turbine and generates the electricity. Okay, and you know, this is still hot after this. Okay, it goes through a cooling tower. The cooling tower, as the name implies, will cool down the fluid. Okay, now it becomes back a liquid, goes back here, and the process is repeated. Okay, throughout lah. Okay. Don't worry too much about here. There are three types of power plants: dry steam, flash steam, and binary cycle. This is actually related to the temperature. Yeah, temperature of here, the heat exchange here. Yeah, and if you're interested, you can look further into that. The advantages and disadvantages of geothermal energy. One of the things, the good things that it's available all year round. It does not involve any fuel combustion. Okay, it's independent of weather. Sorry. It is a very clean resource, very little emissions or overall environmental impact. However, it has its disadvantages. You know, geothermal reservoir is not everywhere. It's very location specific. Yeah, so you cannot just simply put in your power plant there and then generates electricity. Not possible. You're going to have to look for a specific area and then have to work on that lah. It's not widespread. High installation costs can run out of steam, may release harmful gases, transportation, and also the possibility of earthquakes because you are injecting water into the sometimes the tectonic layers. Sometimes, yeah, it depends on how deep you go. So it may even lead to earthquake. Now, biomass. Biomass is organic material. So whatever is organic material around you, it's called biomass. It comes from plants and from animals. It all actually contains stored energy from the sun. Okay, because as the sun provides the energy, the sunlight to the plants perform photosynthesis. Okay, and photosynthesis requires carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide here will be fixed by the biomass and it grows, fixing the carbon dioxide as it goes, releasing oxygen, okay, and consuming water basically. But as this happens, okay, the biomass itself contains a lot of chemical energy. Okay, and this chemical energy actually comes from the sunlight here, the whole process there. Okay, even when you think about it, even fossil fuels, it originates from biomass. If you still remember how petroleum and natural gas is formed, yeah, it's all from biomass. Of course, it takes millions of years to happen, but at the starting point, it comes from biomass. So there are actually many uses of biomass as energy resources. Okay, these are some of it. And there's a lot actually. You can use it as biofuel, you can use it for as the source of heat, you can use it to produce biogas, so on and so forth. Yeah. But basically, if we talk about energy, okay, and usable energy some more, a lot of technologies nowadays, we want to make full use of biomass, okay, especially those that are in the form of waste. Yeah, because we want to have this industrial symbiosis where waste, yeah, you know, from various types of activities, human activities, we produce waste. And if this waste can be made use for to produce something else, and in this case, energy, that would be perfect because you would not have to treat the waste. And this is what happens now. But people, of course, they are starting to be able to produce this. And we see this in multiple industries, multiple places. They're starting to make full use of this type of sources, agricultural waste, animal waste. There's even energy crops, things that are being grown for the sole use of being produced as energy. Okay, so basically there are many different technologies. Here is a summary of all the available technologies, or rather the different classification. And when I talk about biomass conversion, this is biomass conversion to energy actually. Okay, and we have 5, thermal, biochemical, chemical, electrochemical, and mechanical. We're going to look at each of these soon. But first, just as a summary, thermal, okay, it's related to heat, right? Even if you think about it. So basically, it uses heat to upgrade biomass into more practical fuels. It has 4 alternatives. It's called combustion, torrefaction, pyrolysis, and gasification. Whereas for biochemical, it means that you are trying to process this biomass biochemically. So meaning that it uses microorganisms, enzymes to produce something from the biomass just now. Some example is anaerobic digestion. Of course, here it's producing biogas. Fermentation can produce a number of different biofuels, and composting here will produce, it's called fertilizer. Okay. Now, chemical. So chemical processes, it converts this biomass to other forms. So for example, Fischer crop synthesis, or it is also called FT synthesis. It's actually a chemical process, and this is related to heat and pressure. It turns the biomass into chemicals. If you still remember when I was talking about petroleum being processed into a number of different chemicals, it's very, very similar to that. So you can imagine, instead of petroleum, it's actually biomass. So agricultural biomass, for example, you can actually chemically convert that to chemicals, different types of chemicals. We also have the electrochemical pathway, where the biomass can be converted directly into electricity via electrochemical oxidation. And this can be done through direct carbon fuel cells and also microbial fuel cells. There are others, but those are still in development stages. Lastly, the mechanical way, it involves crushing, compressing, and pelletizing. It actually produces solid fuels. Okay, and we're talking about things like fuel briquettes, for example. Okay, so those are a summary of all these 5 biomass conversion to energy pathways. Okay, and here is another, we can say that representative lah. Of course, here there are different concepts, but basically you can see from here, it doesn't cover all 5 just now. It only goes for thermal, mechanical, biological here. I referred to as biochemical, and it also has liquefaction, but just now I put that under thermal, right? So basically there are a number of different ways you can produce energy, and that energy may come in 2 different forms. It can be in terms of fuel, can be in terms of solid fuel, biogas, oil, bioalcohol, among others. All right. Now, just a brief overview. I won't go too much deep into this one. Just now you still remember thermal, okay, and there are 4 different types. So those 4 different types is actually can be differentiated by the temperature the process is conducted in. Okay, combustion, gasification, if the temperature is more than 700 degrees Celsius, pyrolysis, 400 to 650 degrees Celsius, torrefaction 200 to 350. Okay, and that is what is being produced lah. Here, if you see, okay, based on the different types of process, right? Whereas for HTL here, I put it under thermal, if you guys still remember. But basically, you just put in the biomass, okay, using the HTL reaction, and you can get a number of different types of chemicals. You can get hydrocarbons. Why hydrocarbons is significant? That is basically the fuel used in your car, and different types of hydrocarbons. Fatty acids here significant because that is being used to convert basically to convert the petroleum to diesel. Okay, amino acids, sugars, phenols, so on and so forth. There's so many different types of products that can be produced from HTL. Now, the biochemical biomass conversion, of course, basically one of the example is anaerobic digestion, where you put in different types of waste, okay, and you have the microbe inside the digester. It will digest the biomass, producing biogas. This is the gas form. The liquid form is called digestate, okay, and the digestate is actually very useful as fertilizer, soil amendments, livestock bedding. So it can be further used. And of course, the biogas here is actually methane, CH4, and CO2. So the methane can be used directly as fuel. Okay, but other than that, it can also be used to produce electricity and heat. Okay. Another way, if you guys still remember just now, I talked about biochemical. Okay. One of it is related to fermentation. So you have something like biogas, biomass, whatever types of agricultural residues, for example. Basically, that biomass, if you imagine something like, Malaysia is very rich in oil palm. So the waste from the oil palm plantations, okay, is like the palm fronds, okay, the leaves, even the empty fruit bunches. These are very attractive commodities that can be fermented to produce many types of biofuels. Okay. But basically, what happens is, those type of things, sometimes it's very hard or it has its own structure. Okay, and this actually comes from a portion in the biomass called lignin. It gives it the strength. Okay, but if you want to use it to produce biofuel, you have to remove the lignin first, because what is actually used in this process is the sugar. Right? So sugar here, don't think about it in the form of your table sugar. Okay? But I'm sure you've heard about sucrose, glucose, fructose, all those are types of sugar. Yeah, and it depends on the whatever biomass that you are using. Okay, the composition will depend on that. But I would say the most the best portions to be used for fermentation is the sugar form. So you don't want the lignin, so you have to do the delignification. You have to remove the lignin, Okay? And then you have to hydrolyze the remaining cellulose and hemicellulose. Okay? Because cellulose and hemicellulose is still complex sugars, okay, and still has to be broken down further into smaller forms. Smaller forms here refers to things like glucose, sucrose, etc. Okay, hydrolysis will do that for you. All right, and now when you finally get the sugar, you can proceed with fermentation, and that will transform the sugar just now to biofuel. Okay, so that is what's happening in fermentation, or the biochemical pathway of transforming biomass into energy. Okay, so if you look up biofuels, there's actually many generations. The first generation is generated from edible biomass. So things like corn, things like sugarcane. So they actually use sugar to produce ethanol. If you still know, if you have ever heard about Brazil, one of the biggest producer of bioethanols in the world, because they are also the largest producer of sugar. And they have a supply, so they use that to produce the biofuel. But that is first generation, and people generally do not go for that now because it comes from edible biomass. And when we say edible biomass, you know, this will relate back to the food versus fuel debate. Oh, sorry about that. Food versus fuel. And basically what it's saying is that you know how many people are hungry right now. How could you produce fuel from that? Okay, so that is what people are saying about first generation. So they go now to second generation, which is formed from non-edible biomass. So this is what I mentioned before when we talk about waste. Okay, we want to use something that is wasted, and before maybe you just leave it there or you have to treat it. But now with the advances in technology, you can actually use those types of biomass to produce fuel. Okay, and this here uses things like wood, straw, grass, waste. There's even the energy crops. Yeah. Now, so while this is all well and good, people are also very interested in third generation biofuels. And this is actually fuel from algae. Yeah, because why is this very interesting? It's because even though you are using non-edible biomass, okay, the process usually here it will produce CO2. Okay, so while it is being fermented, although you get the biofuel, you also get CO2. And in third generation, basically, you do not use fermentation anymore. The algae will, you know, algae is also use photosynthesis. Okay, and I've mentioned just now, photosynthesis, it uses CO2. And so it uses up CO2 actually from the atmosphere, or you give it CO2. It fixes that into its own biomass, okay, as it grows. And then that biomass is turned into biofuel. Okay, so it can either be from algae itself, because algae also produces a lot of lipids. Okay, and lipids here can be turned into biodiesel. Okay, and algae also from the biomass itself, it can be used to produce other things, hydrogen, bioethanol even. There's so many different things that you can produce from the biomass, right? And of course, lastly is the fourth generation, but this is basically, some people do not use the term fourth generation, yeah, but it's also the only difference is that they try to make an even more effective solution. For example, using pyrolysis, solar to fuel, engineered algae, and gasification. All right. So I've already covered this actually. So if you're interested, you can look further into this. But basically here we are talking about algae lah. And the best thing about algae is that within its biomass, there's a lot of potential. It produces different types of composition, has carbohydrate, protein, fatty acids, lipids, terpenoids, whole cells, and each of these portion can actually be turned into something else. Yeah, so that is why it is very, very interesting in terms of that. And even just now I was talking about lipid. There's even types of algae that can secrete oil, yeah, from its biomass. Right. Next is the chemical conversion. So I'm not going to go further into this because I do not want to confuse you. FT synthesis is basically a chemical process. You use the biomass and you can actually produce that into different types of chemicals. Yeah, you can always look that up if you're interested into it. And also you can look into the conversion that I put in here. Yeah. Electrochemical conversion of biomass. This is actually related to fuel cells, okay? And how fuel cells work is that, remember just now I was talking about anode and cathode, okay, in the early part of the lecture, right? So the basic thing to remember about cathode is it's very high in electrons, okay? Whereas for anode, it is the positive terminal lah, okay. Now, we think about it in this way. Hydrogen is goes in to the fuel cell, okay, and when it enters the anode, the electrons will be stripped, okay. When electron is stripped from something, it becomes positive, right? So these positive protons, okay, will pass through the membrane into the cathode. Okay, whereas for electrons, it cannot move through the membrane. So it has to go through the circuit outside here to go into cathode, right? So this movement, this circuit creates a circuit lah, basically, and it creates electricity. And once the electrons come here, it combines back with the proton just now, and with the oxygen coming from the air, it is combined, producing H2O. Because here is H, this is O, right? So H2O comes out. So that is basically the byproduct. So you can generate actually electricity and only produce water and also heat as the byproducts. Yeah. And of course, if you are interested in that, you can look into direct carbon fuel cells and microbial fuel cells. The mechanism is very, very similar to each other. Yeah? It's only utilizing different biomass, different types of biomass. Yeah? And even in microbial fuel cell, or we call it MFC, yeah? MFC uses, can use wastewater, okay? And it effectively treats the wastewater, producing electricity while at the same time treating this water. So that is the plus point of using MFC. And lastly is the mechanical conversion of biomass. Okay, this is basically you have wood or agro waste and you process that to produce briquettes. And briquettes here can be used as solid fuels for heating and cooking, especially in regions where access to electricity or other fuels are scarce. Right, and that's it from me for today. I hope you enjoyed today's lecture. I know it's a bit long and there's a lot of information, but hope you enjoyed it. Good luck and I'll see you in the next lecture. Bye-bye.